Good evening, welcome back to Heart and Hand. This is Heart and Hand Extra, your second free show of the week. I am your host, Adam Thornton, and joining me for tonight's show, we've got a star-studded panel. First of all, we have Ross Hutton. Ross, how are you?
Oh, star-studded. Thank you very much, Adam. It's good to talk to you, mate.
Yeah, I meant me and David, but anyway, spoiler alert, but we also have David Edgar. How are you?
Don't worry about it, Ross. Every band needs a bassist.
I'll get there eventually.
Okay, so we just had a chat off air, and as usual, Heart and Hand style, we said what we talk about, and the consensus was just Rangers. So it might not be the best 45 minutes that you're going to have this weekend.
Oh, that's
but,
a promising.
We'll try our
That's
best.
a promising beginning for our army of listeners. That one.
Never let light among magic, Adam. Come on.
It'll be a thrilling, sparkling discussion to match the performance. It won't. It'll be better than that. I can assure you. Unless we decide to just start burping and telling Benny Hill jokes, I think it'll be better than pretty much all of Rangers' Champions League performance. As much as the manager and the players want to cling to an hour against Napoli and an hour against Liverpool, I don't think. What is it? One swallow doesn't make a summer. Well, 2 hours out of 9, butter no parsnips, I'm afraid.
No, absolutely not. Ross, we must talk about the Champions League. We're just going to talk about it in its entirety. We're not going to go into the nuts and bolts of Ajax. But from my point of view, I'm now at the stage where I'm just happy that nightmare is over and we can close that chapter and never think about it again, if possible, if memes allow us to do so. How do you sum it up from your point of view?
Again, it's a promising question. I think you can almost maybe take it in two parts. The off the park aspect of it is promising and is encouraging. Obviously, a lot has been spoken about in terms of the finances of qualifying for the Champions League, and a lot has been spoken about in terms of how we would spend those finances for qualifying for the Champions League. Now, no matter which way you look at it, whether you're looking at it from the perspective of we should have used that money to invest on the park or we should have used that money, I think like we are doing on other longer term club projects, then it's still a positive to have, and it's still a massive, massive benefit for Rangers Football Club to have access to that amount of money. Now, maybe the figures that some people thought that money was worth to Rangers, there's a disparity there, but that's a different conversation. The fact of the matter is we still managed to get our hands on it, and that is a positive, no matter how you look at it. That is, however, the only positive of this Champions League campaign. It's been a real reality check, I think, for us as fans. Definitely, I was guilty of it. That European run last year, despite looking at it now, maybe clouded our vision slightly as to where we actually are at Europe's top table. The reality is, when you're coming up against the level of opposition that we did in this group, and it was a hellish group. It was an exciting one, but it was a hellish group in terms of opposition that we'll face. It really has illuminated us as to where we are as a team. I think I've said before that Rangers is a Champions League level club with a Europa League level team. And we've been found out massively, massively time and time again at this level. Not just in terms of, as I say, the quality of opposition we face, but in the way that we have managed to sometimes shoot ourselves in the foot with the goals that we've conceded, and we've been too open or too poor. And listen, within that, you have the hammerings against Liverpool and Ajax away in particular. It's just been a really, really illuminating campaign as to where we are at this level, and I think that's the politest way we can put it.
David, Gary Stevens has no Champions League goals. James Tavernier has one. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Gary Stevens wouldn't get cut up 8 times within a simple inside ball during a match, and that is exact 8 times. 2 led directly to goals, 1 was ruled offside, and then there was some bad finishing. If James Tavernier is fully fit, and we've been told that he isn't carrying an injury, then we've got an issue there, because he is nowhere near what he can do and nowhere near the fitness required to play that position. He got done with a simple ball inside time after time, and I know he had an inexperienced centre half in there next to him, which doesn't help, but it was painful the other night. Look, there's a lot to unpack in this particular group stage. Firstly, that record, that is a beamer, no matter the circumstances. I don't think we'll have it for long, by the way, and that's one of the things about the Champions League, is that it has been taken away from leagues like ours. deliberately. So we're not supposed to be there, and they would rather that we just pissed off. And I think that if they could get away with just handing us a check at the start and telling us to bugger off, then they would do. But so I dare say another team will get it, but it doesn't matter because we held it for a bit, and that's all that matters. It is quite possible to be of the opinion that we overachieved in Europe last year, but we underachieved this year. I think it is quite possible to think that, yes, we did magnificently to get to where we got last season, but this year we still should have done a little bit better than we've done. For me, Adam, the thing about it was I go right back to that first night in Amsterdam when, bizarrely, a team who had achieved good things in Europe for 4 seasons, who had just come off a Europa League final, who had qualified. It's not like they were put straight into it. They had to qualify, and they turned up in Amsterdam utterly devoid of confidence. Now, we'd just been talked at Parkhead, so that maybe had something to do with it, but I could not believe the stage fright that Rangers team took in the Amsterdam Arena, considering that literally 10 days before they had beaten PSV 45 minutes down the road. There's not that big a discrepancy between PSV and Ajax. Ajax are a slightly better team, but it's not a million miles. But that Rangers team took to the field, rabbits in the headlight, worst of the 90s stuff, utterly terrified, and were a shambles. And then, unfortunately, at least during a period in all their away games, that's what they did. They had zero belief. They went to Anfield, tried to shut up shop as best they could, got away with a 2-0. Napoli, nobody believed for a second that we were going to go there and get anything other than tonked. At home, yes, did try to have a go against Napoli. We're a bit unfortunate with the red card and then overran. Liverpool, yeah, fine for the first half, but football lasts for 90 minutes, and what went on in the last 25 was shambolic. I mean, it was unprofessional, I felt, what went on in the last 25 against Liverpool, never mind anything else. And then against Ajax, you saw that again. They took to the field terrified, waiting for something bad to happen. Something bad happens, and that first goal to me summed it up, because Ajax literally waltzed through at walking pace. They just played through the Rangers defence any time. Now, look, we did have injuries, and that has to be mentioned, and that is fair. But for me, I go right back to the start of the tournament, and Rangers approached it wrongly. They looked to me like a side who didn't believe that they should be there. And of course you're going to achieve nothing if that's the case. Whereas last year in Europe, against better sides than us, it's fair to say, against good sides, they didn't have that inferiority complex. Whether or not it's the logo on the shirt that did it, Adam, whether or not it was too much respect, I definitely think for some of the squad, Liverpool, due to our proximity to them geographically and the fact we hear so much about them, I think they were overawed when they came up against them. And obviously, as you take beatings in the Champions League, and fans my age will know this better than most, confidence drains and you just want it done. And that's exactly what happened with Rangers. But to me, it was the perfect summation. The bitter perfect summation came with, we get the penalty, we score it. There's a couple of minutes left to grab something, right? Not much, a point, in a bit of a comeback in a match that we've been second best in, and we immediately concede another one. And it's the same goal we've conceded half a dozen times in the group. And you just thought, yeah, let's get out of here. It was a squad that wasn't good enough for the Champions League, that's been proven, that didn't think it was good enough for the Champions League, and didn't enter with any real belief that it was going to acquit itself any way other than it did. So all of these are factors. We talk about the recruitment. We've done that to death, but Rangers, if this was the case, should have made that clear before they did, because an expectation built up after the PSV game to the end of the window. And in that silence, I think we all began to think, because the only indication we had came from Gio when he said, well, it should allow us to do a bit more business. We then went into the Champions League on that negative, because people were expecting something to happen. So that was badly managed. And now we have the wreckage of this campaign. We just have to get through it. We're fortunate in a way this season that the Champions League gives us a reset, that you wouldn't normally get, gives us 4 weeks to get players fit. They have played a lot of matches this season. I know that some fans hate that. They go, oh, well, they're earning X amount. It doesn't matter how much you're earning. If your body's physically tired, it's physically tired, right? It's not, the money doesn't change it. I'm not asking you to feel sympathy. I'm just pointing at the fact. So all of that combines to probably be a huge benefit to us and give us the opportunity to go away, reset, and come back in the second half of the season. But my fear is for next year, any European competition, Adam, that the psychological roadblock, because we saw this happen in the 90s, that once you have a season like we just had there, the scar can be an issue for far longer than one season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how we bounce back. I guess starting on Sunday first of all, but yeah, more importantly to go back into Europe, because the last 3 or 4 years, the title aside, most of the highs have came from how far we can go in Europe. So in that sense, it's a bit of a step back, or it maybe feels like a bit of a step back. I think you touched on something quite interesting there, and it's maybe that difference between the highs of last year and the lows of this year that's probably made that a little bit more difficult to swallow. Ross, what's your take on that? Because as David said, it's fine to have overachieved last year and it's absolutely fine to have underachieved this year. But I think because we overachieved so frequently last year, possibly, we maybe got ourselves wrapped up in we are a better team than maybe we think we are, or we're at a better level in terms of Europe than we think we are, because as we said so many times last year, we had no right to be in the Europa League final. It was a fairy tale for us. So I guess the crushing reality of that is that anything less than that, we probably wouldn't have been happy with, given we're Rangers fans. But to then drop down to the levels that we've seen this year, it's maybe just the contrast that is making it seem worse. I mean, it is horrendous, to be fair, given it's the worst ever record. But it's maybe just the contrast as well, which is completely compounding that misery.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an aspect of that. Listen, it's not just something that relates back to last year, Adam. We've been overachieving in Europe for years now, really, relative to where
Yeah.
we've been. If you think about when Gerrard first came in, we overachieved just to get into the group stages of the Europa League. And then there's been that kind of gradual building and that gradual progress, but still, relative to where we are in terms of a financial position compared to the other teams in those competitions, we were overachieving. Now, for that to go as stratospheric as it did last year with that Europa League run, I mentioned it earlier on, I really do think that maybe did skewer the expectations a wee bit. Now, up against that, we were all aware going into that Champions League group about the level of the opposition. I don't think anyone was under any illusions as to the kind of games that we would be facing against Napoli, Liverpool, and Ajax. But within that, what we have shown over the past couple of years is that we can compete. Now, I'm not saying go and playing these teams off the park, far from it. And listen, some of the performances that we had last year in Europe against the likes of Leipzig and Borussia Dortmund, they were one-offs. I mean, it was a freakish season, but it's shown that we can do it and we can be respectable at a quality of opposition that isn't a kick in the shirt off of that. Leipzig are a Champions League team, Dortmund are a Champions League team, for example. So I think kind of going up against that and going into this year, there was the expectation that we could do ourselves justice at this level, lay a glove on these teams and try and make our mark in the competition. I didn't really ever think that we would get out of this group or have Champions League football after Christmas, but I did think, and I don't think it was unreasonable to expect that we would at least compete with these sides. And I think that's going forward, the bit that's going to jar with me the most is that you burst a gut to get into this competition at the third time of asking, really, between winning the league or winning the Europa League in the position we found ourselves there. We don't do either of those things. We go through the qualifiers, we have that magnificent night in Eindhoven, and you do all that to get here, and you don't make a mark apart from that negative stat, like we said, about being the worst ever team in the competition. So to go from the absolute highs of reaching Seville last year and go on that European run, which momentum carried us through quite a lot of it looking back on it now, but to have that really, really stark contrast there after years upon years of building in European progression, yeah, I do. I think that is something that makes it hurt an awful lot more. And what David said there about the scar tissue that could be left after this is really the concerning point, because that year-on-year European progression got us to a point where we not just got to a European final, but we felt as though we could go to a place like Eindhoven and go away with a result and qualify for the Champions League. That does take years to build up. So if that has been totally decimated now, and it'll only be shown next summer when we know, then I've got real concerns about when we'll be back at this level of competition. Because listen, despite the absolute chasings we've got, I know we're sick of the sight of it this season, we do want to be back there. You know, the Club Brugge has been mentioned quite a lot in terms of their model and year-on-year progression at this competition to try and get themselves into a state where they can properly compete and be in the Champions League or European football after Christmas. We want to try and emulate that to an extent. So we can't have a situation where this has just destroyed the psyche of the club so badly and destroyed the mentality of the players so badly that we shy away from this level again. Now, my concern is that you're not going to be able to pull a rabbit out of a hat in qualification every single year like we have this year. So we need to have the confidence that we can get back to this level. And as I say, if that has been totally decimated after all the hard work we've been putting in since 2018, then I don't know where that leaves us in Europe going forward. We're a Europa League level team. I think that's fair to say, and we would quote unquote compete in that competition an awful lot better than the Champions League. But for where we are as a club, which is slightly different, we need to be aiming to be back there constantly. So the thought of that being totally undone by the absolute chasings that we've taken this year is a long-term concern that I'm not going to shake until I actually see it be put to bed.
One thing I'd also point out that we need to pick up from the Champions League this season is size. And without getting to Pomo and to 4-4-2, it's a different type of thing. I'm not talking about a 6'4" clogger. You know, I'm not saying that we should be signing Gary Kenneth type players, but our players looked smaller and they looked physically unable to compete with the teams they were up against. How many times did you see Ryan Kent just bounce off a fullback that he would probably muscle out the way domestically? How many times did you see our midfield, kind of big guys? There's a level of fitness that we don't have. There's a level of physicality that we don't have. And I'm not, as I say, talking about these monsters that, you know, are enormous footballers. That I'm talking about, there's a degree of physicality at the very elite level. The front three for Napoli in both matches, with the exception of Anguissa, look like tiny little people on the telly. And then you see them up close and you're like, my God, it's just solid muscle. Now, some of that might be due to the, shall we say, the more expensive supplements that are available at the top level in Europe. And by the way, anyone who doesn't believe that sort of thing goes on is, I've got some magic beans I'd like to sell you. So if that's the case, then there's not a hell of a lot you can do about that. And again, it's something that UEFA will, I'm sure, turn a blind eye to. But we do need to be fitter, stronger, better in these areas, because we ran out of steam twice. That's one thing that Gio hasn't mentioned in his, you know, we played well for 60 minutes in 2 matches thing. It's like, yeah, but we died in our arse in the last half hour of both of those performances because we just physically didn't have anything left in the tank at the end of it. So I think that there's, as well as obviously a massive technical level, you saw that with all the Scottish clubs in Europe this season. Whenever they play, we give the ball away constantly, and these teams score when you do that. We give the ball away and make the wrong decision when we're attacking, and these teams don't. They work you hard because all of them have a good technical level, and your kind of Scottish enthusiastic player who's all energy, all effort, not really a high technical level, you stick them in there and it's unfair. We joke about it sometimes as Scottish football fans, and we say when we're watching Man City at Liverpool, it's like a different sport. It really is. And you saw that there, because things you get away with in Scotland, you give the ball away, you get it back quite quickly, especially if you're Rangers. You do it at that level, 30 seconds later, your keeper's either picking it out the net or he's made a great save, and that's the difference.
To what extent do you think, David, that difference is just acceptable is the wrong word, but just kind of par for the course, because it absolutely is a level up, and I think expectations, certainly from myself, when the draw was made, were completely unrealistic. I remember we did the live show with Kevin Thompson and Dunfermline. I said, "Oh, you never know. You get a few points for your home games and get a draw away somewhere, and who knows what can happen." You kind of get caught up in it a little bit, but I think when we seen what we seen in Amsterdam in terms of that performance, I very quickly recalibrated my expectations. But over the course, you mentioned all those individual errors. They're unacceptable. I think I can count 8 to 10 of the goals which have literally came as a direct result of us passing the ball to an opposition player and then running up the park and scoring. Where do you fall on that spectrum of this is the level versus our players aren't anywhere near good enough to be able to do that?
I think first of all we all underestimated the leap from the Europa League to the Champions League, and part of that was, and I've heard people say, well, Dortmund have qualified and Red Bull have qualified. Yes, they have, but neither of them are going to win it. Let's be honest, right? Neither of them are that elite level. We had 2 elite level teams in our group who could legitimately win it, right? It's not an excuse, it's just a fact. The jump even from that level that we're talking at, Dortmund, Red Bull level, to Liverpool, Napoli, Real Madrid, etc., is enormous, absolutely enormous. And I mean, it's common sense. If you've got a team that costs 500 million, the chances are it's going to be better than a team that costs 15 to put together. It's just, it's common sense, and you don't like to break football down into just pure economics, but it is a fact. Now, what in the old days you can do, and what we could do in the Europa League, was we could match that intensity. We could, or make up for it, make up some of the technical difference with that intensity. And have no doubt, Leipzig should have beat us, but they shat the bed at Ibrox because it was wild. Everything, our players, the fans, everything, and they just could not get to grips with it at all. That's what you need to do, but I'm not sure you can do it against the very top sides because, as I say, they loud noises don't scare them, Adam. They're not dogs, right? So a crowd can be going nuts. It doesn't bother them. They go out and they play their game. They're physically stronger than us. They're bigger than us. They have deeper reserves, of course. They can bring on quality. When you're flagging and our bench has got very little on it, their bench usually contains 4 or 5 world-class players. So I don't think you can, and this might sound defeatist, I don't think you can bridge the gap to them. And they're not the ones that we can really be aiming at. What you're hoping for is a kinder draw than we got. You're then hoping for at least the ability to play for that third place. And then if you get a win or two, then the confidence that might give you an extra 5-7% and you catch one of these sides on an off night, then maybe. But none of that happened for us. We didn't make anything happen. I'm not in any way trying to say that we were unfortunate or didn't get what we deserved. If anything, really, Napoli could have been a much bigger hiding away. They kind of took the foot off the gas at 2-0, thankfully. I think Ajax were playing in second gear the other night as well. So it was just a fairly catastrophic. But everything that could go wrong did. There was, a big defeat in a big match before we went in, which shook them more than it should have, incidentally. But we've always had concerns about players in this squad and their mentalities. Usually they've been able to compartmentalise it when it came to Europe. If you remember Braga, when we were in the midst of that atrocious run under Gerrard just before lockdown.
Yeah.
They've been able to compartmentalise in Europe. They couldn't this time. They took that into that first match. Then I think they just collectively panicked and they collectively looked at each other and thought, we are way, way out of our depth here. And when that happened, given all the stuff I've just talked about, the actual, the physical and technical gap that does exist, when you then put in a belief gap, I said it a lot in that European run last year, Adam. You'd be sitting in press conferences or you'd speak to players, off the record, and I said it on these shows, I said it to you guys in private, they think they're doing this. You know, they really believe. And I remember in particular sitting in the press room in Leipzig after the match, the first leg, and the Rangers coaching staff and the Rangers players were walking by and do them next week. And you're like, oh, aye, we're going to beat them. That they needed more than 1-0. It was the exact opposite here. Rangers went into these matches hoping for something and expecting nothing. And of course, that's exactly what they got. So, look, there's a lot to take into it. I think that we will need, obviously a squad rebuild. Some of the players just aren't good enough. Some of the players are too old. And that will need changed. Then, yes, experience does help. And you would hope that in situations where it gets tough, they don't completely collapse the way they did far too often this season, and that they have the ability to get through it. But as Ross mentioned there, we'll only find out if that's the case next year. As I say, we saw with Rangers in the mid-90s that after a while, the sense of deja vu that crept over anything went bad in one of these games, and the team just reverted to that sort of, well, you know how this goes from here. But as sad as it is to say, the Champions League has deliberately been taken away from nations like ours. They don't really want us there. And the idea of getting to the business end of that tournament for a club from our league is, I'm afraid, laughable.
It's funny that belief thing. It can take a long time to implement and to get it, as we've said, over the last 3 or 4 years. But you can lose it in an instant. And that's just one of these things that happens. So fingers crossed.
Well, as the Stereophonics once said, Adam, only takes one tree to make 1,000 matches. Only takes one match to burn 1,000 trees. And this season, we fucking set fire to that forest.
Absolutely. Ross, moving on, thankfully / hopefully, depending on your outlook, some of the comments around the team, from the manager, from other members of the coaching staff, from the boardroom, from the players, reasons, if you're positive, they could be reasons for some of the things that we've seen. If you're negative, they could be excuses. But I'm talking about financial disparity, fitness, volume of games, player injuries, etc., which undoubtedly have all had some kind of impact on the Champions League spell. But if we then translate that into what we now see moving forwards, financial disparity, well, we're on the other side of that domestically. So not only does that not become a negative, it becomes a very big positive for us, because the expectation is that we should go out and win every game. Injuries become less of a factor because we have better players than the opposition, regardless of who we put on the park. And we're hoping when we come back from the World Cup break, we'll have a large number of those injuries available. Fitness, again, with less volume games for certain players with the smaller squad, etc., our fitness levels should improve, unless we get any more injuries, which, touch wood, surely not. And then also this training piece with the volume of games, we're not getting much time on the training pitch, etc., etc. Things that I understand, but it's been the case for 4 years and we've still managed to do some good things. So if that is a reason or it's an excuse, it's gone now, because when we come back from the World Cup break, we're pretty much Saturday to Saturday for 6 months. We'll be better than most teams that we face. We've got an opportunity to get players back, and we've got a window in January where hopefully we can do something, if not what we think we all need, but hopefully we can do something. So in that sense, it's going to be an interesting 6 months, because there's not really anywhere to hide. We don't even have the sort of comfort blanket of, we're doing well in Europe. When we come back, it's just straight out domestic football.
When you put it like that, mate, where do I meet you for our treble celebration? Sounds like an absolute
Exactly.
canter from this point onwards. Yeah, it should be easy.
Although, can I be the guy who would point out that many times players in this squad have told us they prefer going Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday than having the week off. So sorry to put some doom and gloom in that, but that worries me a wee bit. That
I guess I'm more saying that if it's an excuse for Champions League, then it can't be an excuse domestically. I'm not indicating that I feel confident in our chances of hitting trebles. I'm just saying that excuse is gone.
I've said before that it genuinely wouldn't surprise me if we ended this season a good bit behind the league and having won both cups, because I have this suspicion that Gio's a cup manager. And I think that if you look at his record at Rangers so far, he's very good at getting the side up for certain matches. But the consistency to go out and do it week in, week out just doesn't seem to be there. And I think you saw that. Even people might say, well, he got us through the Europa League group stage last year. Yeah, but it was 2 games. And the first one was, if you win this by 2-0, you're through. So it was a kind of a cup tie. Yeah, I hope I'm wrong.
I think the thing with Gio in the league so far that we've seen is we don't lose an awful lot of games domestically, but it has been death by 1,000 cuts very often in the league. And when we do lose games, it's the Celtic and it's absolute tankings, which is a concern. Now, I was having this kind of conversation with a couple of pals the other night as well about our league record, and we don't have an awful lot to hang the hat on with Gio, or indeed this squad, barring that one season. With Van Bronckhorst, what we've seen is you get a couple of decent performances thrown in there. This season, you're thinking about it away at Tynecastle. I thought we played well. There was, spells within that where we weren't sparkling, but on the overall, it was an improvement of what we've seen. But the majority of the time, it's slow, it's laboured. You go to an away ground, and it's pretty much toss of a coin as to what kind of Rangers side or what kind of Rangers performance you're going to get there. And maybe barring that initial spell when he came into the side and you kind of got that new manager bounce, to borrow a phrase, which I don't think that was really much down to him. I think most managers probably could have got a bounce at that point. And Adam, you've said consistently yourself that you had concerns about our performances at that point. I'm not seeing a body of evidence that when we come back with the World Cup and we get players like Goldson back and Hadji back and Lawrence back, that's going to somehow kick us into gear in the long term, because I've just not seen it under this management team. So there are positives there in terms of we do have this big break to get these players back from injury. Hopefully Tav can recover in that period of time. I think we all know that Tav isn't fit. That's not a secret anymore. So hopefully he gets well rested and we do get a couple of these players back coming into the flip side of this World Cup break. But then you've got massive games coming back there. I think before we play Celtic, we need to go to Pittodrie and Rugby Park. And those small feats for a manager who, like I said, his way record is questionable, to say the least. I'm a wee bit with David on this. I'm just not feeling that level of positivity right now. And to be fair, maybe I'm scarred by the results that we've had recently, but I'm not seeing that level of consistency or any indication that we're going to go and have that run of consistency that's going to take us into a real position where we can kick on in the league. That scenario that you mentioned there, and you outlined that we could potentially end up way behind in the league behind Celtic, but have a good crack at both cups is very much one that's on the cards right now, because I'm not seeing that body of evidence that over the course of a season we have it in us to go on that consistent run that will see us really put the foot down in the league. Not under this management team. It's too inconsistent. It's too here and there. You don't know what you're getting week in, week out, and I don't think the squad do either in terms of going to these tough away grounds and really taking control of these games. How many times have we seen it where we've thrown cheap points away, or we've just not really put in an acceptable level of performance in the tail end of last season? Europe might have had something to contribute to that as well, I don't know. But until I'm seeing it, I can't sit here and say that it's going to happen. So again, I'm not really feeling in that positive mindset right now. Against that, of course, when you do have massive players for you like Goldson coming back and Hadji coming back, although it will take him a while to get back to match fitness. Tom Lawrence as well. These are big misses. Yilmaz as well, now who obviously in true Rangers fashion was absolutely brilliant for the first 10 minutes against Aberdeen, then goes off with a hamstring injury, which is just tremendous. You do get these players back, it is going to make a difference, right? And there's always going to be a drop off when you don't have those players available. But last year, the squad wasn't an awful lot different. You still had a lot of the core group of players there, and we've seen those core mistakes come back. So again, until I see that being rectified, I can't sit here and say that I'm feeling overly thrilled or optimistic.
Yeah, because the issues that have been issues for a while are still issues. Rangers are overly reliant on a couple of players for goals, Cholak and Tavernier. The midfield doesn't have the variety of players that it needs, and we don't score enough goals from wide. Now, I do think that we are missing Lawrence. I think he will make a difference. Goldson will clearly make a difference. I think him and Davies look good as a defensive partnership. Yilmaz looks as though he can make a difference because he is creative. in an area that we can too often break down to the same stuff. But the issues remain, and that's why in January it is imperative that the midfield is nowhere near up to it at the moment. Lundstrom has to carry it a lot, and his form hasn't been great. Hasn't been as bad as others, but Scott Arfield, I've said before, I think is a good substitute. I'd be quite happy to see Scott Arfield on the bench and being used, but he's having to play 2-3 games a week at the moment. That can't be it. Stephen Davis is a Rangers legend, but is nowhere near what he was. Ryan Jack obviously has injury issues. So we've got to get a couple of midfielders in. Kamara seems to have disappeared. I know he had an injury, but he wasn't quoted before that. I think the manager kind of lost faith in him after that absolutely abhorrent 10 minutes he had as a substitute versus Napoli. So that's an area that needs to be worked on. Wide, we've got to start having guys contribute from there because they don't. And we've never replaced the goals that Roof and Hadji brought in the 55 season, which is a heck of a chunk of goals to lose. So all of these issues need to be rectified because otherwise, and it won't be every match, we'll still continue to win the majority of our matches, but then there will be the stupid draw like we saw against Livingston. There will be that, when you chuck away 2 points here and then 2 points there and it mounts up because unfortunately our rivals don't do that. And that's there is a very high standard for us to meet if we want to get our title back. But I think that you can't say with any great confidence that it will totally turn around and be what we want it to be. I don't think it's unrealistic to say that bringing back 5 or 6 guys who are first team players will help. Of course it will. That's just common sense. But long-term issues that have been there and haven't been rectified will continue up until they're rectified, funnily enough. So that's why this January window is a big one for Rangers. It's a big one for Ross Wilson, and it's a big one for the Rangers board because they have been on the end of deserved criticism recently for a wide range of things. But for me, the key one has been the squad building's been uneven at best. I think we've wasted several windows, and now we can't afford to do that thing of going, well, it's January, there's nothing we can do. It doesn't work like that. You only really have 2 to get it right, and if you throw one of them away, you just increase the pressure come the summer.
Yeah, I think if there was an element of surprise that fans were unhappy when the window closed in the summer, and it may have caught people by unawares in the club or whatever, because they maybe felt that we didn't need reinforcements in certain areas that everyone was crying out for, such as midfield. I think they would have to be seriously out of touch with supporters' thoughts to not think that there's an immediate and urgent need for players to come in January. Finances, of course, will dictate it all. And as far as I'm concerned, we've only really had finances in the last 2 windows. I would argue that we spent in the summer, in terms of players that we've got in versus money out, I would say that we've spent well. Matondo being the obvious outlier there, but I would say everyone else that's come in looks like they can contribute. Uneven, as you said, David. Did we need possibly a midfielder more than we needed maybe someone else coming in? I would say absolutely. But if there are any funds available in January, I think we all know that it really needs to go towards a midfielder and a right winger, which you could argue we've been saying for 4 or 5 windows.
And that's the frustration. Yes,
that's frustration.
That's exactly it. Because just to go right back to what you said at the start, nobody can say, oh, well, you were quite happy then. Everybody was saying, really? No midfielder? And okay, they bought a right winger. Fair enough, but he hasn't proved so far to be up to it as of yet. So, and technically, let's be honest on Matondo, he's not a frigging right winger, he's a left winger. Every decent spell he's had has come when he's been playing on the left wing. That's where he plays. So it's maybe not the boys' fault. We need to strengthen that position, and we desperately need, and of course we need a goalkeeper. Now that one might be able to wait till the summer, but the midfield can't.
But then that's a failing of recruitment for me as well. If we've scouted Matondo and we are of the opinion that the experts within the club are of the opinion that Matondo can come in and be a £2.5 million player, which at Rangers is a first pick player. If we're of the opinion that he can come in and be that on the right hand side, he hasn't done that yet. He hasn't looked anywhere near that. So that is a failing of recruitment. I would also go even further, and this is a slightly off-piste one. I don't know if I mentioned this on the last show, but I would also argue that Yilmaz is possibly a failing of recruitment as well, when you factor in the budget that we had available to us. If we bring in a absolutely highly rated fullback that will be here for 5 years rather than 5 months, whoever said that, that's absolutely fine. But in terms of immediate needs, did we need to spend £3.5 million on someone who isn't going to be up to speed physically until mid to late October, when, as far as everyone else is concerned, there are more pressing areas of the pitch to strengthen? I absolutely think
you're totally right. There should always be three baskets, Adam. Short term, medium term, and long term. And you can't overdo any of them, at the expense of the others. They all need to be, and Rangers got that one wrong. Now, in a few years' time, hopefully we'll all be going, what a great signing he was. But it didn't change the fact that there were other areas of that side. I found it shocking in the summer we didn't spend in that midfield. I found it shocking the last 4 windows that we haven't spent on that midfield. The fact that the the most money we've spent for a midfielder at Ibrox currently is Charlie McCann probably tells you a lot. And unfortunately, I think they gambled there that they would get one more year out of Jack Kamara and Arfield between them, if you know what I mean. That they wouldn't have to play every week, but maybe one of them would play, and you could swap them around, and it hasn't worked.
Absolutely. And it can be right player, wrong time. And by the way, just for anybody listening, I've been a huge fan of Yilmaz, and I absolutely think he'll be the left back when we come back after the World Cup. But there's that debate there. If you have a finite amount of money, was that the best possible short-term need? Which we'll wait and see. Just interesting on your point, on David's point, sorry, Ross, around the players and this. I'm keen to dig more into this Saturday to Saturday, how big an impact it's going to have on the players, because we haven't done it. This will be now 4 years. January 2019 onwards was a straight run with no European football, but we haven't had one since. To my mind, obviously players are going to say they prefer to play more because most players are going to want to play games rather than doing training, etc. But from a management team's point of view, I think they're going to find this World Cup break very positive, I guess, and they'll be able to do what they want. Again, it comes back to this point. Okay, you've said we don't get enough training time. Michael Beale said it in the past, we don't get enough training time. We're going to land 6 uninterrupted weeks on you here. Excuses are out the window. You have to make good use of that time and come back firing. What's your thoughts on that? I know players coming back, getting some tactical structure, etc. in within that window isn't necessarily going to be a magic wand. You could possibly argue that we didn't see huge improvements in playing style throughout the pre-season period that we had, albeit we had a lot of players coming in piecemeal. Is there not an expectation there from you that fewer amounts of games will let us try and embed some more tactical principles, or are you comfortable with the evidence that we've got so far that what we're seeing is just about what we're going to get?
The theory is sound. Like you're saying there, we've not really had this opportunity for a couple of seasons to go Saturday to Saturday. We've not ever had the opportunity that we have now in the middle of the usually hectic and busy winter schedule to have that massive month off where, like I said, we don't just have the opportunity to let players recuperate from injuries, but we also have that time on the training ground. The concern against that is exactly what David mentioned. I think we've all seen it from this squad that they do inherently prefer to go Thursday, Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday, whatever it is. They do like that midweek game because it builds up that momentum and it builds up that intensity. The only real body of evidence that we do have to look at from a Rangers team coming back from long periods and gaps off is, of course, these much dreaded winter breaks that we've had, and we've never really came back from them flying. Now, that's not a criticism of this management team in particular. This is a problem that has came well before they've walked in the door. But it's more of a squad concern. Now, I think we've all raised concerns about the fitness of this squad so far this season. No idea what goes on behind closed doors apart from rumours that I've heard that they maybe have more days off now, the players. But I don't know. But I think from what we've been watching on the park, we've all noted at one point or another that this squad does not look as fit as it has in previous seasons. So you would be looking at this massive month off as an opportunity to have a sort of mini pre-season, almost to get them in on the training ground in a much more relaxed setting where you're not having to think about, okay, we've just had Ajax, now we've got St Johnstone, then Hearts and St Mirren, then Dundee United, etc., etc. You have them in that total bubble almost in the way we had sort of COVID. You can try and block everything else out and just say, okay, there's no real other football on apart from the World Cup, which doesn't involve you. You can get in here, we can work on the tactics, we can work on your fitness. And in theory, as I say, that sounds perfect. My concern is just with how much this squad will take that on board and how we come back from this long layoff. Because any time that I've seen us do it before, it's never really went well. So I'm not wanting to project that too much onto this upcoming break because I'm obviously hopeful that we'll come back. And am I right in saying it's Hibs at home? Is the first game back after the World
Yep.
Cup off the top of my head? So you do have that opportunity. You're not going back and jumping straight into, let's say, a Pittodrie or a Rugby Park, which we've seen before, which we do have coming up coincidentally, but it's not that massively back into a difficult away fixture. But it is still a tough game. You know, the Hibs aren't doing badly in the league. So you want them to come back with that intensity, being well rested, really get on the front foot from the off. But as I say, and I've said hundreds of times with this squad, we've not seen that. So maybe jumping back to what I said earlier on about that body of evidence, if I've not seen a body of evidence, I can't sit here and say that I'm confident that it's going to materialise and going to happen. So, like I said, the theory of it is absolutely sound and perfect, and you would like to think that the management team will be reveling in that opportunity to have that month off and get them back in and have that hard reset right in the middle of the season to then try and push on and go again just before and obviously after the new year. But with a squad, we've just not seen it before, Adam, and that's where my major concern is.
David, St Johnstone at the weekend. I think we're all agreed 9 points is absolutely mandatory from these 3 games, which will be a challenge given the injury list, performances, morale, all that sort of stuff. But regardless, I think 9 points are mandatory. If we drop in any of these games, I think it will get even more toxic than it has done. Is that the maximum expectation for you, or are you now, even with the Champions League scar tissue, etc., are you aiming for, well, we need to see some more semblance of attacking play, such as we've seen against Aberdeen, or are we pretty much just in this bunker of get these 9 points, we'll get to this World Cup break? I completely agree with Ross. It may not be the panacea that we're all hoping it will be, but in terms of just getting there, is that the be all and end all for just now?
Yeah, the 9 points by hook or by crook is all that matters. Obviously, it would be nice to do it well, and to go into the break on a little bit of a high, but it's just about getting the 9 points. You know, I mean, as the old cliche goes, I wouldn't want us to play really well and draw. You know, the goalkeeper is the storm or whatever. I'd rather, you know, be rubbish and win. But clearly, the fact that one of the complaints that is raised, and I think fairly, is that Rangers can be an absolute struggle to watch at times. But it's so slow and boring, and there doesn't seem to be any pattern to the play. So against Aberdeen there was, and you saw the reaction. Incidentally, the reaction was really positive because people were. You could say it's a little sad that we were almost pleasantly surprised, but people were like, "Yeah, that's what we're asking for." You know, front foot. They went for 90 minutes. You know, that was the noticeable thing in that match. It was a 90-minute performance, which we haven't seen too often this season. Whereas if you look at the victory against Motherwell a few weeks ago, it didn't really do much for people, did it? It didn't stem much of the criticism. So yeah, look, 9 points is an absolute minimum. If we don't get 9 points, then the manager's position is very much going to be up for review, I think. Well, it already is with the fans, but the noise will get louder and the pressure will get more. He needs 9 points. There's just no getting away from it. The fixtures aren't unkind, given what they could be, right? Yes, St Johnstone and St Mirren are not easy games, but nor are they in the list of the ones you would say are the toughest ones. So, you know, if you had to have away fixtures, they're reasonably decent ones. Hearts at home, anyone at home we should be beating. That's why the Livingston result was so bad. So yeah, look, I kind of agree with what you said about we still do have these injuries, we still do have a bit of a patchwork team. So I'm not expecting them to go out and play like Brazil 70, but I am expecting to see Verve. The 3 games in a week, and then they've got a month going empty it. Going absolutely empty, and just leave everything out there, get the results, and then, as you say, we can take that break and regroup, and there'll be new players back players back in, and then hopefully new players at the start of January. So anything less than 9 points, let's not be coy about it, will be a disaster, and it will be something that will lead to calls for change getting even louder.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Press conferences happened earlier on today, Ross. We had Player of the Month, Antonio Cholak. Coincidentally going through a bit of a barren spell. He's only got 1 in his last 6 compared to, I think it was 6 in his last 4 before that. But I don't think there's any doubt right now that he'll be starting up front for these 3 games. I think everybody would be in agreement with that. Most of the talking points will obviously be around defence and then what that then means for midfield. The manager picked out Kamara as possibly someone who will be available on Sunday. He also mentioned we've got John Lundstrom back from midweek suspension, and Charlie McCann is ready and eligible to play. There's no mention of Ben Davies there, so I'm not sure if that injury is going to keep him out for this game or not. I would assume so if he's not been mentioned. So I guess there's no debate about centre halves. It's Sands and King. But what would you like to see in front of them?
I think Davis has basically a session tomorrow, and if he gets through that, then he'll play.
Possibly. Okay, cool. So there might be a bit of debate there, but I think we know we've got 3 of them. If Davies doesn't play, it'll be Sands and King. Ross, what's your thoughts ahead of that? I know you're a big Charlie McCann fan. Would you be having him in next to Lundstrom, or would you maybe go with a Kamara or even a Davis coming back in?
You might have to, especially when you put it like that. I mean, the obvious ideal for a game like this is to have King and Davis at the back. You have King and Davis at the back, and then you can have Lundstrom and Sands in front of them, which I think worked really well against Aberdeen. I think we all maybe commented on it in terms of James Sands. It was probably one of the best performances we've seen from him in the Rangers shirt. But if that's not going to be the case, it's going to have to be a centre-back partnership of King and Sands, then you're looking at your midfield options there. John Lundstrom will play. Obviously, having had the week off, which might have been the best thing for him, who goes in against that is Stephen Davis, put in a hell of a shift the other night as well. We can't keep asking him to be playing that.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. Stephen Davis and Scott Arfield, God love them, but the 2 of them were
swamped.
The game they played was watching Ajax players run round them. Look, I know what you mean. There was a big effort put in. For me, I'm a great believer in try to minimise the amount of disruptions to your team that you have to. So ideally, it's King and Davies, and then you can play Sands and Lundstrom, as they did last week. If that isn't possible, if Sands does have to go back, put Kamara in as a 6 and keep Lundstrom as an 8. I never understand making 4 or 5 changes when you can get away with making 2 or 3. And just try to minimise the disruption to the team and say, well, look, Glenn, you can play. And he's actually got a pretty good record at St Johnstone, Kamara. It's one of those stadiums he's done pretty well in.
This is the thing, David, and this is the point I was going to make. How much do you trust Glenn Kamara at the minute?
Given the level not as far as I could throw him, unfortunately, at the moment.
And maybe I'm banging on about this as I have done before, but at that point, is that not the time where you do turn to a player like Charlie McCann? Now, I know we have done in the past. We've done it at home to Dundee United, for example, and it's not ideal to be throwing him into that kind of situation. But if your options are Sands, who's eliminated because he's a centre-half, Glenn Kamara, who I'm eliminating in my mind because I just don't trust him at the minute, and I think he has mentally checked out, who are you left with?
Then it would be McCann, but can McCann at this stage of his career play as a 6 in the SPFL? I'm not saying he won't eventually, but at the moment, is he not better further on? So I would probably go with Kamara because it is an away game and we do desperately need the points. If it had been, say, Hearts at home tomorrow, I'd probably say go with McCann. But no, I get it. I mean, the manager is the one watching Kamara in training. He did put him on the other night, which indicates that he must think he's got something. Would it stun me though if I say the manager does do that and we end up having to take Kamara off at half time because, as you say, he's mentally checked out? Unfortunately, no. I certainly wouldn't be falling down shocked.
Yeah, I think it's probably the case where I agree with you. It's maybe not ideal to be putting that kind of pressure on Charlie McCann to be our sixth in an away game in the top flight of Scottish football. But that is unfortunately the position we have found ourselves in now. To sort of save the blushes of Kamara almost, I'd be going with McCann, but that's just my personal opinion.
I'd be going with Tillman in behind the striker, but I would be telling Alex Lowry you're going to get 20 minutes.
Exactly. I completely agree with that. I think we can use that as an example. Tillman, as a young player, he probably has tired in games during this little spell he's been back in. So if we're saying Tillman starts, gets 60, Lowry comes on for the last half an hour of at least two of these games, I'm happy with it. Sakala and Kent on the flanks. I know we'll have Kent hate in the comments probably, but I think just these 3 games, Kent on the left, Sakala on the right, Cholak up front, for me, makes the most sense. As we've said, just whatever consistency we can try and pull together from the 14 or 15 players that we've got available, I think we need to try and do. So let's hope that Ben Davies comes back and that jigsaw doesn't need to be unnecessarily moved about.
Yeah.
Okay, that will do us for this evening. David, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, youngster.
Yes, and Ross, thank you.
Oh no, thank you, gents. Thank you, listeners. It's been a pleasure.
It has been. It's always good to come and talk about Rangers, even in these trying times. But we wouldn't have it. We wouldn't have it.
We would. Yeah. We'd be winning.
I was going to say we wouldn't have it in any other way, but we would have it in a lot of other ways, actually, if it was down to us.
Plenty
so
of
you can
ways,
ignore that. Okay, all that's left is for me to thank our producers in London, Mike Lee and Paul Myers. Hope we all enjoy the game on Monday, but even if we don't, David will back
on Sunday. If they turn up on Monday,
don't turn up on Sunday.
Don't turn up Monday.
Don't turn up on Monday because the game is Sunday. David will be back on Monday.
Yes, there you go.
To recap Sunday's game. Now I know how it feels to lose 3-1 to Ajax. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.